But this video involves what to do if you have cancer. What do you eat? If you have cancer and you go to your doctor and you ask them, what am I supposed to eat? Many times they will tell you, it doesn't matter. Eat whatever you want. And to me, that is so wrong. Depending on what you eat, you can either feed cancer or starve cancer. I am not selling you any diet. I'm not selling you any nutrition. I'm not selling you any products, okay? Check with your doctor before implementing what I'm going to show you. Some people are going to criticize this video and say, well, what does Dr. Berg know about cancer? Well, I want to just put some links down below of several of the research papers that I'm involved with, and you can read up on that. I think it's pretty sound information, and when you get all the details, it'll make a lot of sense. If there's someone that discourages you from even researching this information, I would always ask them this one question. Do they have a better solution for cancer? Because the problem with cancer right now is the statistics are terrible. We spent trillions and trillions of dollars on cancer, and we have definitely not solved that problem. The mortality rates of treatment with cancer are roughly the same as they were a couple decades ago. Now that I have that out of the way, there's a couple things you need to know about cancer. Cancer is very heterogeneous. What does that mean? It comes from the Greek word hetero, which means different, and genes, which means kind, type, or origin. This word really means there's many different types of cancer. It's really not one disease. The second thing you need to know is that cancer itself is very sick, okay? It's living on the edge. Cancer actually came from normal cells. When the mitochondria get damaged, there's a plan B that the cell will then revert to. And the reason I'm even telling you this is because we really want to understand cancer, to look at the vulnerable areas, the weak links that we can attack. There are certain therapies that people use, increasing oxygen to help kill cancer, like hyperbaric, or even exercise, where you're flooding the body with more oxygen. You can actually stress the cancer out. It's called ROS, but we'll just look at it like more oxygen can actually help kill cancer, okay? So that's another point. The other thing to know is that cancer tends to spread into areas of your body, into inflammation and other areas where you don't have oxygen. The other thing about cancer is it's constantly evading your immune system, because your immune system has very targeted cells to kill cancer. This brings up the point of chemotherapy, right? It kills off the cancer, but it also kills off part of the immune system as well. So we just want to take into consideration our immune system and understand it more and do things to strengthen it, which I'm going to cover in a little bit. As a side note, vitamin D is super important in your immune system. And what's really interesting about cancer cells is they tend to block the receptors for vitamin D because somehow they know they'll survive better. So knowing that information, you might want to keep your vitamin D levels a lot higher than they are normal to penetrate the blockages or the resistance that the cancer has created in the receptors for vitamin D. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next section. But here's the next thing you need to know. There's various fuels that cancer tends to live on. So in other words, if you have a certain type of cancer, it might need glucose as a dominant fuel to function. That right there gives us a strategy, because if we understand the type of cancer you have and the genetics of it, we can then know what fuel it uses to then starve it of that fuel. So that's really part of what we're going to talk about in these diets. The great majority of cancers live on glucose and glutamine, which is an amino acid, and especially the cancers that are very fast growing. But of course, now this brings up another problem, because if you start to starve a cancer off of one fuel and you keep eating the same diet, the cancer will eventually adapt to a different type of fuel. Some cancers also can use lipids. That's fat, especially the cancers that are influenced by your hormones. Some cancers also can live on branched chain amino acids as its fuel. Despite popular belief, and as much as I hate to tell you this, some cancers can even live on ketones and use ketones to build its membranes. And especially in advanced late-stage cancers, they'll start going after the ketones. With cancer, you can't just do one thing. You have to do many different things just because cancer is so adaptive and it'll just try to survive no matter what you do. When you do chemotherapy, you kill all this cancer off. There's always a few cells that don't die, that become supercharged and very resilient. Just like when you take antibiotics, you kill off most of the bacteria, but there's certain bacteria that become now resistant. Because if someone tells you chemo and radiation therapy is going to completely cure your cancer, and it doesn't, well, this is why. But let me just make it very clear. I am definitely not telling you not to get chemo or radiation. You discuss that with your doctor. What I'm going to show you is something that you can add with chemo or without. I'm not going to actually tell you what to do. I'm just giving you the information, but I will recommend that you have multiple strategies. And one is the rotation of your diet. If you rotate your diet every so often, and I'm going to show you this in a little bit, you can then prevent that cancer from adapting and literally put that cancer into a state where it just can't get fuel. I'm also going to highly recommend you do intermittent fasting, 2 meals or even 1 meal a day. Why? Because when you do fasting, you can really shut down the fuel and resources to what the cancer cell needs, but your body can actually go into repair mode. It can go into something called autophagy, and it can recycle old damaged tissues. But I also made sure all the foods in these diets also had anti-cancer properties. So you're just not eating food just for the sake of eating food. All right, with that being said, let's go to the next stage. Okay, we're going to talk about the diet right now. And just so you know, I created a very detailed document that you can download for free down below to get all the nitty-gritty details, because if I were to create a video and talk about every single diet and all the different types of cancer, this would be like an 8-hour video. So I didn't do that. Instead, I'm going to give you the big idea of what you're going to be doing, and then you can download the document to get the specific eating plan and how you should rotate it and the foods involved. We've talked about the different fuels that certain cancers love. Okay, so certain cancers love glucose, glutamine, lipids, others branched chain amino acids, and some cancers can live on ketones, especially the ones that are aggressive and late stage. And so I even listed some of the type of cancers: glioblastoma, colorectal, breast cancer, lung cancer, head and neck cancer, cervical cancer, all love glucose. And then when you download the document, you can just look up what type of cancer you have, and then you can see what fuel that it primarily uses. And also, I mentioned this before, if you look at breast cancer over here, you also see breast cancer over here and over here, because there's different types of breast cancer. And if you know the genetics of your breast cancer, you'll know what bucket that falls under. But realize when we're dealing with breast cancer over here, we're dealing with the advanced stage, probably like a stage 4 cancer, where it's spread to other tissues, okay? You may have 2 different cancer cells, one that loves glucose and the other that loves glutamine, okay? And this is the reason why the diets are set up like they're set up. Like an anti-glucose diet, no glucose, for 10 to 14 days, if you have any of these. And then you're going to switch to an anti-glutamine diet, okay, where there's no glutamine in that diet for 4 to 5 days. This way you can starve off the certain cells that depend on glucose in that tumor, and then also starve off the ones that live on glutamine, and they never have a chance to really grow and take over, because you are constantly rotating the diet. When you do the anti-glucose diet, which is really the ketogenic diet, and then you switch to the anti-glutamine diet, which is eating mostly plants, you'll just keep rotating here, and then you go back here, and you rotate back here. So let's say, for example, you had a melanoma, you'd start with the anti-glucose diet for 5 to 7 days. If you notice, it's a different amount of time than over here. And then you're going to switch to the anti-glutamine diet for 7 to 10 days, and then you just kind of rotate back to where you started from, and you keep doing that over and over again. If we're dealing with prostate cancer, for example, that can survive on lipids, we would start with the anti-glucose diet for only like 2 to 3 days, very short period of time, and then you go to the anti-lipid diet. Now, with this diet, you're going low fat. However, when you read up on the diet, you can do certain fats like omega-3 fatty acids because for some reason they're not going to feed the cancer. They're more anti-cancer. So when you read through it, it's not a completely zero-fat diet, but it is a low-fat diet for a period of time. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to starve off the fuel and the resources for that cancer as one of the strategies. Let's say, for example, you have liver cancer. Well, you start off with the anti-glucose diet here for 5 to 7 days, and then you go to the anti-branched chain amino acid diet. That one was a tough one to come up with because branched chain amino acids are in so many different foods. But when you look at this diet, you'll see what you'll be eating. It's going to be definitely more plant foods. But then after 7 to 10 days, you'll switch back to this diet right here. The diet that I would recommend to prevent cancer is very different than the diet that you would do once you get cancer. Because once you get cancer, you have to go through this whole process. And it's scary because sometimes you're taking chemo and sometimes people are scaring you with different prognoses. So it can be very stressful, not to mention very confusing because everyone wants to give you their opinion. So if you're watching this and you don't have cancer, I would highly recommend the healthy version of the ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting to avoid getting cancer. Then we get to ketones. There's definitely a lot of controversy. I'm going to get comments down below. People will disagree with me, but please read the research on this data because at first I was personally very resistant to even hear that ketones could potentially be used as fuel for cancer until I started looking at everything and I'm like, wow, that sucks. But this is more for the aggressive late stage cancers because cancer is going to do everything it can to survive. And I think it's very helpful to know this because the diet that you would do on these advanced cancers, late stage, number one, you may not even start with the anti-glucose, which is the ketogenic diet because there's ketones. But the problem is when you do the anti-glutamine diet and the anti-ketone diet, this is like mostly plant-based, not a lot of protein. So you might have to do a very short, maybe 1 to 2, maybe even 3 days of consuming some protein to get that protein and then go right to these other diets and rotate them because this is a little more complex. And this is why in other videos I talk about the absolute best thing you could do if you have advanced cancer is to do prolonged fasting. There's videos I've done on people that had stage 4 cancer that literally fasted for an entire month, actually even longer. And that really just wiped out the cancer. Now, I know someone is going to say, well, wait a second. When you're doing fasting, you're living off ketones. And isn't that going to feed the cancer? Apparently, the ketones from the fasting don't help this cancer survive. Now, with these type of cancer, under the different fuel source, I've also listed some key supplements that can help you block glucose or block glutamine or block ketones. The next point is vitamin D, because you want to get your blood levels of vitamin D right around 90 or maybe 100 nanograms per milliliter and get a lot of sun. There's a lot of therapy from both vitamin D and the sun to your mitochondria and to your immune system. Exercise will give you a lot of therapeutic benefits to your mitochondria and oxygen to actually help kill cancer cells. And of course, just to reiterate this fasting, 2 meals or 1 meal a day would be your standard thing. And then here's the really important thing with prolonged fasting. The longer you can fast, the better. I would recommend 1 to 2 times every 2 to 3 weeks, you do a 24 or a 48 hour or a 72 hour fast or even longer. Do it erratically because anything you do as a pattern, sometimes the cancer can adapt to that. So for example, next week you do a 48-hour fast and then you wait for 2 weeks and then you do a 72-hour fast and then you wait for a week and do a 5-day fast. That would be super strategic to your specific cancer. All right, I hope I didn't overwhelm you too bad. I will put this download in the description so you can just click it and print it out and you can follow it and you can do more research and you can show your doctor. But if you have not watched my video on what to eat to prevent cancer, I put that video up right here. It's very important. Check it out.